Hello. Welcome back to Anime on the Sea to Sky, which is honestly one of the more surprising quick turnarounds I've been able to find to at least go back to back, but I know that I have quite a few things that I need to catch up on, and thankfully, considering I've come down the mountain, and odds are I might get a day or two left in the ski season before everything kind of melts away come May, but for the moment it gives me time to catch back up on a handful of the shows and a handful of the pieces of media that I still need to go through and either watch or listen to. But considering that last week I kind of just foregoed any of the news that had gone through at least over the past month, since I'd been away for 2 bit, I thought I might as well go through and catch up on a few of the things that I was able to miss there, which, unfortunately, to start with something that I was definitely kind of expecting, but didn't really realize it was going to be ending this soon, was that the Land of the Lustrous manga is, well, odds are, is going to be over by April 25th, as we only have probably 2 to 3 chapters remaining, which does make sense considering how it ended on the last one, but considering that it's just definitely one of those things where you really want it to get adapted again, especially with what Orange was able to do with those models and with that piece, but considering the relationship they built up with the mangaka ended up, not on the best of terms, so we're not really gonna be having another opportunity to go through and see any Season 2 anytime soon, which is really disappointing. But we were getting, at least a couple of different release dates for a few films where it's like, okay, we kind of knew when they were coming out, aka this year, but we didn't really get any specific date. So, at least at that point, we're going to be getting another Naoki Meta Science Saru collaboration, but this time with a film for Kimi no Iro, and that's going to be coming out on August 30th. So, I don't think it's going to be coming out to the West by the end of the year. Maybe they can push it forward based on name notoriety, but I don't necessarily know if there's so much that they can actually do to get that push forward. And it definitely seems like, off of the back of Birdie Wing, 2024 is going to be the year where golf anime are going to be making their resurgence, considering that, I don't get this. I don't know how many episodes there are going to be for Rising Impact Golf, considering that Netflix is saying, hey, Season 1 is going to be coming out on June 22nd, and Season 2 is going to be coming out on August 6th. So, the manga itself that it's adapting has 17 volumes, so they're not going to be getting through all of it, but the fact that I guess they can do something like that because it's a smaller property and Netflix just kind of picked it up all willy-nilly, that I don't think, because they're going to say Season 1, Season 2, and then just pull the rug from under us. It's like, Season 1's 6 episodes, and Season 2 is another 6 episodes, so you're just basically telling us that if this isn't going to be releasing weekly, which in this case all they've been giving us is 2 release dates, then I really don't know. I would have to double check on the episode count for these, because it's just I don't really know. However, considering that we're getting the Slice of Life golf show, Tombo, coming out this season, and then we're going to be getting Rising Impact coming out, I guess, mostly leading into the summer, and then more... I don't even think Soraro Days would be a drama, per se, or Soraro Utility. No, Days is getting me thinking back to Gurren Lagann, but Soraro Utility is probably going to be... They did say it was going to be coming out for 2025, but whether or not it's going to be a slice of life, I guess, considering that you're finding somebody rising the ranks and picking up the sport and seeing how they interact with it and seeing how the rest of that's going to go, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Because it's just, probably the one that I have the least amount of expectation for, considering that they're following a main character who is just picking up the game, is going to make this pretty... I don't know. It's just going to be the most boring of the 3, and it's the least expectations that I have for any of these 3 shows, considering that they're really just treating the most boring spectator sport with a slice of life starting from the ground up, and it is not going to be that exciting and not going to be that interesting unless the dynamic of the trio actually makes up for a lot of the lack in either conflict or growth. So, I don't know. We're just going to wait and see about that one. And then the Mononoke film ends up getting a release date of July 26th for Japan, so I don't think so. Even though I could still see it coming out within the 5-month period, that it would still have the opportunity to come out in the West, I don't think Mononoke has enough staying power or has enough notoriety, especially related to the name, even though it is easily like one of the best supernatural shows I've seen, definitely with its aesthetic. And the Medicine Man is just quite the character that we end up getting to follow through the majority of these vignettes, but considering that there's not really a lot of momentum, especially since that ended up coming out back in 2007, so it's just, yeah, I'm gonna go watch it because I really did enjoy the show, and odds are I'm definitely gonna really enjoy the movie, but considering it's been over 15 years since this small series came out, well, we're just gonna have to wait and see. One thing that although that I'm definitely not going to put at the top of my priority list, even though we're definitely going to be seeing this movie by the end of the year, is going to be the 4th My Hero Academia film, which is going to be labeled as You're Next. And all essentially we're seeing is that it is instead of Darth Maul, Darth Might, we're just going to be getting like, oh no, All Might is somebody either created a evil twin clone or somebody has infected his weakened superhero mind, and it's like, dude, I don't even know. I have no real surrounding this, even though the 3rd movie was fun, as it was kind of like a cross-continental tour through Europe to kind of see how the rest of it goes, and I'm definitely going to be appreciating the Yutaka Nakamura cut that's inevitably going to be coming out of this film, but considering that this is going to be coming out at the end of the 7th season, or probably in the middle, because we're going to be getting, actually, I don't even know, I think it's going to be 2 cores for the My Hero season that we have, but that means it's going to come out in the middle, and they're going to be doing the exact same thing where it's like, yeah, no, you have to get this movie out in the middle of this season that we're going to be producing so we can generate as much momentum and as much notoriety for the My Hero Academia franchise. It's just not going... I say it's not going to work. It's going to make money. It's going to have the opportunity to go through and still get people invested because it is another shonen film, but the fact that this is like the 4th film we're getting in 5 or 6 years is kind of insane, especially since we know the effect that it has on the main production, which is definitely reaching another climax, especially with what happened after season 6. I don't know. Because another, not necessarily being a negative Nancy, but just something that's kind of a slap to the face, especially with the studio that is adapting this, is that we are getting a original TV anime done by MAPPA called Zenshu. And it is about an up-and-coming animator who has never fallen in love and who fucking despises working in the industry that they're in, because it just fucking sucks. And the fact that it's MAPPA, especially in the midst of all the controversy and all the other projects and all of the people that they are wringing dry inside of this industry, the fact that they're going to be the ones where it's like, yeah, we want to put out an original show, kind of like Shirobako, in the sense that we're going to have the opportunity for, this overworked, underpaid animator to have the chance to fall in love with somebody. It's like, anybody else, dude. Literally anybody else, I would have forgiven that. But the fact that this is the original thing that they're going to make, it's like, yeah, we want an original story about an animator who's just down their luck, dragged through the mud, overworked, underpaid, wit's end, but they're gonna fall in love, guys. It's gonna be so sweet and so charming. God, I can't imagine the mentality of the people that are actually that have been drawing this for at least the past 18 months, and then just being like, oh, it's like, yeah, you get to have the opportunity to express yourself and imprint yourself onto this character that we're going to be making. It's like, you don't fucking have the right to tell them to do any of this sort, but because it is their job and this is the original story that they're coming up with, it's like, good luck, dude. Because essentially we have Mitsuo Yamasaki who's going to be directing it, and they're the ones that did Sleepy Princess and Tadakun Never Falls in Love, so they're directing it, and the Carolyn Tuesday Astronaut writer, Kimiko Ueno, is going to be writing the script. I have legitimately no expectation for this, which, for better or worse, if it turns out well, I'm going to be great, but considering that this is the original show that MAPPA of all studios is in charge of making, definitely rubs me the wrong way, and it's not something that I can really come back to. And for those who were excited about the Wit Studio original show, well, original, not original characters, but the fact that the Suicide Squad Isekai is going to be getting a July premiere in the middle of the summer season, sure, I'll watch an episode or two because it's Wit Studio, but it's just, I really don't know, man. It's not necessarily something that's a priority. I did really enjoy the Suicide Squad animated series that they had with Harley Quinn and Ivy, Clayface. Seeing how that crew bantered and got along is going to be great. I just hope that they have the opportunity to, swear consistently like every other version of the Suicide Squad except for the what was it? So I think Suicide Squad with Will Smith and the shittiest editing and storytelling that you could imagine. I think that was Suicide Squad. So this is the Suicide Squad. And I hope that they follow it up around those kinds of dynamics and those kinds of characters, considering that if they're going to make a PG-13 version with the Suicide Squad, you already saw how that happened, and none of it ends well. And then also something that I've definitely just been not necessarily like diving too deeply into, but kind of seeing how this is the first major time that this has been going through, is that there was a huge leak from Crunchyroll over the past 2 weeks about a lot of the first and second episode premieres that they were able to go through at the conventions that they were going to, considering that it definitely seems like whoever was working inside of Crunchyroll or somebody in relation to Crunchyroll was able to get the leaks of the episodes that they were going to premiere at SakuraCon and the Puerto Rico Comic-Con, where I believe it's like 10 to 14 days like before the rest of it went through. And so they got their hands on Chill in Another World, Sound Euphonium Season 3, Konosuba Season 3, God's Games We Play, Banished Former Hero, Reincarnated Aristocrat, and Astronaut. All of those got leaked out into the torrenting sites, and so many people had the opportunity to go and watch those about 2 weeks earlier than everybody else. So, kind of interesting, since this is the first major leak that I've seen, and you can definitely, have an incredibly easy, point A, point B section as to how everything kind of played out, especially where it's okay, they had the early episodes, they were going to a con, and somebody got a hold of those files, and it's okay, understandable. But seeing how the rest of that's going to go, where it's kind of oh yeah, Crunchyroll, they did get absorbed by Sony, but just because they were sold for a fucking massive amount of money, didn't necessarily mean that Crunchyroll's IT department or security was definitely up to snuff, because it's dude, these guys had been cost-cutting and layoffing and cost-cutting and laying off and then moving the IT tech departments to some random country in Europe to take over the majority of their security operations, and it's how the fuck did this not happen sooner? Because I am just not in any mood to either support or defend Crunchyroll in this case. It is kind of hilarious that, in this case, if you are a pirate sailing the high seas, you had the opportunity to go through and see these a lot earlier. It wouldn't be great if you were spoiling anybody who didn't have the opportunity or didn't want to and wanted to see it at the later rates. That would fucking suck. However, now that we are getting to a point where pirates are getting more avenues of control to see things earlier than other people, I'm really curious to see how that's going to direct the larger corporation security measures leading into the future. And now, even though we are already, even with the leaks well past, and we are 2 weeks into the spring 2024 season, I finally have the opportunity to go through and catch up on the things that I was able to go through and complete in winter 2024, which, to be fair, wasn't a lot, because I know that there were quite a few things that I didn't have the opportunity to watch, or I thought about going through and getting into it, but it just never really gave me, I don't know, it was never something that I kind of wanted to get into. Because, Solo Leveling was the big one that I didn't watch, where the general consensus of everybody that I heard talking about this show was that, okay, well, most of the fight scenes are cool. Sung Woo, I think is the main dude's name, is just, he's solo leveling, and he's getting incredibly powerful, and he's climbing up the ladder, but as he gets more powerful, the more distant from his humanity he gets, which, as an edgy teenage writer, would count as one of the coolest characters you've ever seen. It doesn't make them entertaining, or relatable, or gullible, or engaging to any point of the audience. So it's like, all right, he's fighting for other people, but he's not hanging with other people, and he's not looking for any connections, and he's just, like, as entertaining as a wet towel. Like, the dude is just apparently so bland that by the time he actually does get to the point where he's been leveling enough that he's a threat, is kind of like, well, alright, now this dude is just, he can scream and he can get a lot of conflict in the battles that he fights, but outside of that, he's just not interesting at any point at any time. So it's definitely going to be getting a second season. We know that, and for the people who are enjoying it, like, go through. And if you want a power fantasy show, then this is definitely going to be something that's up your alley. But considering that it's not going to be following up on the character or the story or the world building development, then that's completely off of my end. In terms of all the romance things that came out this season, I mean, if there were anything that I felt like I should have watched Sign of Affection. I read all of Hokkaido Gals up until about 3 years ago, so I watched the first episode and thought, yeah, no, this is just about what I remember reading, so only give it about an episode or two before it's like, yeah, no, it was fine. Dangers of the Heart is definitely the highlight, considering that it's one of those, like, modern romances that nobody has anything negative to say about, or the majority of the people that are watching, and it's kind of the same deal. I watched a handful of episodes of the first season, but considering that I'm already caught up on the manga, it was definitely not something that I felt like I needed to continue, because I'm still enjoying the manga, and I would imagine once season 3 rolls around, everybody is just going to be catching up, and they're going to be enjoying the same lighthearted fluff that we've all been able to enjoy over the past several years. My partner wanted to start watching Mashle because of a TikTok that she saw of the second opening, which everybody is saying is one of the best openings of the year, and I thought it was fine, and I just do not understand the hype behind it. Now, I would say we've already got one duo that I'm going to be talking about later, but the other duo that I was thinking about talking about inside of this series was... But the other duology that I wanted to talk about this season was the comparisons between Chained Soldier and Gushing Over Magical Girls, and what happens when you half-ass an adaptation, and what happens when you quite literally just go full ass all the time without stopping. And it's just seeing the overall conversation and the back and forth between a lot of these, where apparently Chained Soldier does get pretty raunchy, and it does have good art, especially in the manga that it's adapting, but the fact that they really just didn't go all the way, and they were really hoping that the quote-unquote ecchi things that were still going to be displayed inside of the anime were going to translate well, and then they would find Blu-ray success, and then that would give them the opportunity to go through and produce a season 2. You have to give more. Like, I understand that there are limitations, especially when you can publish on broadcast television, but considering that that's all they did, and the amount of stuff that Magical Girls was able to get away with in its entirety is completely different. Especially where it got people invested and it got them into the conversation on, A, how did this make it onto television, and then B, is there something beyond the erotic face that this show ends up presenting, which apparently is a bit more. I didn't really see it, which is kind of the same deal. I went through the episode discussions every week because I didn't really feel like this was going to be my thing until a buddy of mine wanted to watch the first few episodes, and now I'm definitely on a list because we are literally just trying to find things to say, and watching what is happening on screen, I'm just thinking, like, how did this get past the censors? But then also, everybody from the production to the voice actors seems to be having a phenomenal time working on this, which is definitely really concerning, especially whenever it comes to age, as it always does, and it's still incredibly fucking concerning. But seeing the success that this was able to bring, especially with now, if you want to talk about what they were able to get away with in the television broadcast to what they will inevitably get away with on the Blu-ray releases, I don't even want to know. But considering how, for better or worse, passionate a lot of the people working on this show was, and kind of seeing how the main character and her duality, especially whenever it comes to her personality, it's kind of like, oh no, I'm sorry, you awakened and you're an S. So we're just going to have to wait and see how the rest of that goes, because the manga is still in full display, but considering the success that they were going through, it's like, yo, we didn't really put a lot of effort into the animation here, so we were not expecting anybody to really latch onto the show as much as it did, and it's like, well, I got some good news and some bad news. But yeah, I do think, at least for the shows that I did watch, I'm going to have to basically go through an entire episode describing what I loved about Freyrin. So at the very least, I'm extremely glad to see how this production went. I will get to talking about it at an episode at a later date, but all I can say is it being at number 1 on Mal is definitely no coincidence and no joke, and if anybody is even remotely invested or interested in anything related to the fantasy genre, go and give this a watch. Dungeon Meshi, the same here. That is, I'm really appreciating that I still get, very much like Freyrin, 2 core for Dungeon Meshi, because it is easily the most fun I've been having out of any show that came out this season, save for the show that I watched in tandem with one of the ones that I ended, or am going to end this episode on. But just all the chaotic animation that Studio Trigger's been bringing to the table, the crazy relationship and the dynamic between all 4 of our mains, especially with how large the cast is going to be getting, especially with the last few episodes we've gotten, where it's just that everybody except for one character is pleasant, and the only unpleasant character is the antagonist, but I'm really curious to see how they paint them out leading into the future, but everything revolving around Dungeon Meshi was honestly a phenomenal piece, and it's the same deal. We got elves, we got fantasy, straight fantasy. I don't even want to talk about the bullshit that was revolving around the Oxford Dictionary, and, well, no, the Oxford Dictionary was fine. Them using those terms is fine. The IGN never deserves to be talked about in any capacity outside of video games, period. And then Apothecary Diaries for sure was easily, like, one of my favorite mysteries, harkening back to something along the likes of what Replay Value was describing as one of his favorites inside of Hyoka, where it's just Mama's dynamic with Jinshi and all of her retainers and the 4 princesses that make up the major power dynamic outside of the Emperor, or the courtesans in this case. Absolutely loved almost every episode, but seeing the relationship dynamic, especially with how, I don't know, it's kind of another one of those things where I really do feel like I'm going to have to go and, like, give these 3 its own tandem, because I would say towards the end of the season, knowing that Dungeon Meshi will have 26 episodes under its belt, Freyrin had 28, Apothecary had 25, all of these 3 are probably, like, Freyrin and Apothecary are easy 9s. Dungeon Meshi has depending on how it ends and where it ends in the story, has another opportunity to make a 9, so I'm really curious to see how this plays out. Tis Time for Torture Princess was always a pleasant... Tis Time for Torture Princess was also incredibly pleasant to watch. I had read quite a few of the chapters when it was coming out initially, and kind of seeing how they were able to still kind of, like, inject a little bit of fantasy towards the rest of it, where it's kind of like, no, this is a comedy series, we can essentially take it wherever we want to go to at the service of a joke, and it was like, okay, phenomenal. All the characters were likable, the dynamics were incredibly charming and well thought out. I would love to see more of this come out in the future. But the biggest surprise to me easily this season was Bang Brave, Bang Bravern, considering that this was essentially Tokusatsu Top Gun, leading in towards the start of this, where you have an alien threat that is en route to destroy the world, but the only one that can help and stop this is the Hawaiian military bases that revolve around both Japan and America, coordinating their mecha strikes with utmost efficiency, and kind of seeing how the rest of that was able to turn out was incredibly phenomenal. I guess to put it bluntly, it was just one of those shows where essentially you took the homoerotic subtext from Top Gun and then made it just full text. It was absolutely insane how the majority of the first couple of episodes came out, and it was just kind of like, oh, there was a large talking robot. It's like, okay, understandable, Tokusatsu, we've seen this a million times before. It is hard simping for our Japanese military protagonist who is currently being waterboarded by the American sect that is stationed on the island, and that's all they do. There's an American section that does act as part of the main force that goes through and tries to retake the Earth towards the rest of it, but there's always a really dark, reoccurring gag that this one section of the American military, all they know how to do is just waterboard people, And it is look, in practice, it is horrifying. It is just probably one of the worst experiences that you can imagine. But the fact that they try to waterboard a sentient robot with a water tank on top of an aircraft carrier is just a complete fucking removal of all sense of reality. But that's probably just the right amount of campiness that you would need for a show like this. In the sense that every cliche, every big fighting robot like section between the power-ups, between the bonds between the characters that they make between either same hobbies or relationships or pasts, and feeling like they always want to be a hero in a scenario that always makes it feel dim. Everything revolving around those tropes is fine in my eyes whenever they just crank it to 11 and they really feel like they have to hammer home the point that they consistently have to take it all the way up to the nth degree, that it comes around to being the butt of its own joke, and it's always hilarious and it's always hysterical and it's always something that regardless still has the opportunity to bring the overall energy up to a peak that there are very few shows that it can match. So I'm definitely glad, because every season that I watch, there's always one show that I feel like I have the tiniest bit of expectation for, and it kind of just deteriorates, where there is always one random show that I'm never going to expect, one that just completely comes out of the blue and pleasantly surprises me in every way, shape, and form. And thankfully, Bravern was definitely one of those shows that was able to fill that gap and give me just a pleasant experience all the way through. So now, the show that is on the opposite end of that spectrum is one that I was definitely curious about due to the people who were involved in its production, as well as kind of what it was representing, and that was Metallic Rouge. And so this series was a 25th anniversary project for Studio Bones. It was essentially written by the dude who mostly focused on adaptations between Super Cub and Log Horizon, a bit of Macross, a bit of Durarara, like just a lot of pieces that had the opportunity to go through, but most of it was adaptation. But he was given the opportunity to go through and write this cyberpunk-ish sci-fi tokusatsu in the opposite vein, where instead of giant fighting robots, you basically just have human-sized robots fighting in a not even post-apocalyptic future. Like, not even a post-apocalyptic future, where this is a future where humans still have the opportunity to jump to planets and try to make those planets inhabitable, but it's still... there's just way too much wrong with the world, and way too much wrong about the dynamics of the characters, and essentially the time that the show was given. So, unfortunately, spoilers for Metallic Rouge, like leading in towards the rest of it. If you really do feel like a Bones 25th anniversary tokusatsu series or sci-fi futuristic thing is definitely your jam, then you can definitely shut it off here. But Metallic Rouge was just something that really tried to take a lot of futuristic sci-fi with some cyberpunk, with some class warfare, which is just completely and utterly ridiculous, because the majority of the class warfare comes from basically the exact same set as Blade Runner, where instead of the replicants that you find inside of Blade Runner with limited lifespans, you have these neons which run off of a substance called nectar, and each of these neons are given for free an opportunity to inject this nectar into their systems, which only lasts about a day, which is completely fine. If not for the fact that for some reason this substance is highly addictive to humans, and they can just use it like a incredibly highly psychedelic drug, so they just steal all of this nectar off of the neons just, to get a decently free high. And it's kind of like, well, what is going to be stopping the neons in this sci-fi future? Well, they're injected with Asimov's 3 robotic laws, which of course they can't harm or kill humans, so they were given human intelligence through their AI programming, but they just don't have the opportunity to fight back for any of the injustices that humans go for, so they basically just run out of energy and die and then get chucked into a garbage disposal truck that goes around daily to pick up the bodies of these dead Neans, which I'm kind of hoping that there's some kind of recycling, because that seems like a ridiculous amount of just recycling and funds and resources being spent to like reuse these same humanistic futuristic robots, especially where it's kind of just the majority of the world building like revolving around that one substance that doesn't necessarily get brought up a lot, where it's kind of like, okay, so you simultaneously made a substance that is safe for humans to ingest for a high, but is also a necessary fuel source for all of these to run, and you don't believe that there's going to be any conflict just because the robots can fight back. But the fact that the corporations allow this to happen at a huge loss for the amount of product that they lose for people just stealing nectar is kind of like, why would they let that happen? Besides the point, the main duo of this story basically revolves around Rouge Red Star and her handler, Naomi Orthman, which was a complete waste of Tomio Kurosawa's voice, I will mind you. But it's just, you were kind of hoping that their dynamic, because the basic story of this is that these two have to go around and fight these specific Neans, which are a group known as the Immortal Nine, and they have to obtain their ids by killing them, because these are Neans that don't revolve around the use of nectar. They are immortal, they are essentially human in every other portion of the rest of it, but of course, they can turn into Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and have huge energy reserves that made them just straight up better than people. And it's like, oh yeah, no, my brother told me that I need to go and kill and collect the ids of all of these Immortal Nine because reasons. And we just get thrown into a lot of the stuff where there's also the reason why the Neans were made in the first place was because there was this intergalactic war with these visitors and aliens that came by and almost annihilated the human race, and so we needed an extra militaristic force that would have the opportunity to turn the tide in the war, but you decided to give these humanoid robots feelings and emotions and id and ego, and then you never thought this through, that anything related to that was going to be causing problems in the future. Okay, sure. But as the story goes on, you really do feel like, okay, so for me, I didn't know how long the story was going to last, but it's tough for me, especially when it comes to being a completionist, where especially for a show like this, I was really just on the fence and looking to drop it around episode 5 or 6, because way too many of the details of the world were definitely incongruent, and they weren't lining up to any of the relations or any of the major ideas that any of these characters are trying to go for to achieve their goals. But of course, if it was I was really hoping that it wasn't going to be 24, but in reality, it probably would have been better because if this was 24, because this entire show screams the fact that Bones itself was trying to get this 25-year anniversary project to get something along the lines of a 2-core, to get 25 episodes. But they weren't, and they weren't able to come up with the funding or the notoriety or the momentum or the staff necessary to give this a 2-core 25-episode run, and so they had to condense this story down from 25 to 13 episodes. And it just, you could really feel that in the last 4 episodes, because they are rushing through all these ideas, all these revelations, all of these potential reasons of character growth, and it just really doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. The main duo is not just interesting at all. It just looks like a babysitter, where it's like you have this 20-something looking after a robot who looks like she's in her late teens, early 20s, but has the brain of a prepubescent teen who's really just experiencing the world for the first time. But it's like, oh look, you're a child soldier, you need to go kill these Immortal Nine, kill. But they don't have a good rapport, they don't have a good dynamic, they don't really have a lot of back and forth wit. It's when you essentially have an adult arguing with a child, there is no real conversation happening between the two. It's kind of like, you need to do this, but I don't want to do this. Well, you have to, but I don't want to. Well, yeah, you have to, but why do I have to do it? Well, that would just take me way too long to explain, so you have to do this. It's like, I'm angry, I don't want to do this. And so, on multiple occasions, she runs off on her own because she doesn't want to take set with the task at hand, which is definitely understandable if you have somebody who is essentially the mind of an 11 or 12-year-old, and it doesn't really make the main duo that charming, and it doesn't necessarily give them an opportunity to let the audience care about what is happening to a lot of the people that they're supposed to attach to. Essentially, everything that was going through and that I had hoped Metallic Rouge to be very early on started falling apart, and it definitely at that point didn't give itself the opportunity, which there's not necessarily much that you can do, especially when it's not that everybody was promised, hey, you're going to be getting this amount of episodes so you can have this amount. It definitely just seems like, because the show, even though the show looked fine for the majority of the episodes, not phenomenal, but just fine, that there was more enough of an opportunity to salvage a story, a relationship, to attach yourself towards, especially inside of this futuristic cyberpunk society, but nothing was really interesting. The fights weren't enough. They were good fights, but there's only so much that you can do, especially whenever you're given such little time to try to expand on a world that is really begging to be given a bit of an extension. So it kind of just, at the end of the day, fell apart. However, I did have this idea to compare it at the beginning of the season to another show that I didn't have the opportunity to watch, and I wasn't initially invested when it came out back in 2022, where it was an homage and took a lot of inspiration from 80s and 90s action films, where Metallic Rouge was taken to 80s and 90s sci-fi, was an original show, but in this case, instead of being done by Bones, it was done by A1 Pictures, and ended up starring a female duo that had the opportunity to bend the world in more ways than you would have allowed them to expect, especially given their circumstances, working for an organization that is overlooking them at every turn. And this one I'm talking about is Lycoris Recoil. And so in hindsight, it definitely took a lot more, not necessarily inspiration, but a couple of different pieces that made it familiar towards watching Metallic Rouge. But as this season went by, I was like, ooh, it's like, fuck, I have to watch another episode of Metallic Rouge. But because I want to do this weekly, I'm giving another opportunity to watch another episode of Lycoris Recoil, because it's instantly charming. It instantly gets you invested in this world. You instantly know where it's much easier to be inspired by classic action films that kind of genre elicits, where you go back and, at least for Lycoris Recoil, you're looking at it taking inspiration from stuff like Equilibrium and John Wick for the gun kata. You're looking at the old classics of Arnold Schwarzenegger, where essentially you have Commander and Terminator. You're having the opportunity to go between really random campy action flicks like Con Air or Die Hard. But to be fair, Die Hard is the perfect mix of drama, campiness, and action that leans in towards the rest of it. Even so, the characters in world are incredibly invested, and they are inspired by these specific movies. Like hell, even Max Payne gets an opportunity to have a couple of references thrown its way. And the Terminator dun 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 is a really weird sound placement, but the fact that it was thrown in anyways just really felt like it was a good homage, especially inside of the world that it was taking place in. Because there's only so much that Metallic Rouge was able to take inspiration from, because most of it either came from Blade Runner or Metropolis or Ghost in the Shell. Sure, very recently, nowadays, you could have either Almost Human or Altered Carbon to gain inspiration from, but most of it was basically just coming from the replicants and the humanoid robots that are looking for independence and why that's a bad thing. But Lycoris, in this case, just wears all of its inspiration and all of its passion on its sleeve towards the rest of it to give a really, where it perfectly blends drama, slice of life, action, comedy, a little bit of romance, like in between the rest of its pages, to have the opportunity to go through and give an experience that, which is even more impressive because also on top of the rest of this, just like Metallic Rouge, it is an original work. And considering that we have a lot of these fun characters, because essentially what Lycoris Recoil is about is that there is a syndicate in the heart of Japan called the Direct Attack, or in this case mostly just called the DA. And it is a peacetime section inside of Japan, but this mysterious syndicate basically raises orphan girls as killers to carry out assassinations under their Lycoris program. And so they have the opportunity to keep the peace behind closed doors and underneath the government officials in order to give Japan more of a sense of security. And this gets consistently challenged by outside forces and terrorist organizations led by a specific man that is trying to throw the balance of Japan out of whack, but then of course they are going towards and fighting against this entire syndicate that is leading under our two main characters, which in this case is Takina and Chisato. And so Chisato's a prodigy. She is a gun kata, gun fu, absolute combat wizard that has the opportunity to dodge bullets, which is just, it's crazy enough, but at the very least, the show gives it a reason why she's able to do so, and it leads to a lot of, like, decent fight choreography, and especially whenever it comes to a lot of the fights that she's able to take part in, but then also the fact that she carries this clay-laced version of bullets that instead of killing really fucking hurt, sure, but she has the opportunity to go through and use her skills to still work for the DA, but to not kill. It is her, she has all of the ability, she has all of the skill and the wherewithal to shoot first, ask questions later, but all of her bullets are non-lethal, and so she takes it upon herself to not kill. Whereas Takino, who essentially just got canned by the DA and is kind of like, look, we want you on missions, but we're not gonna, like, keep you in any kind of capacity. You fucked up your last mission. We're going to, like, send you down to just kind of like a mercenary group that is inside of our section. And so it is great to see these two interact, because where one is essentially really straight-laced, follows the rules, trying to get back into the DA whatever means necessary, the other is incredibly carefree, has more talent and does her job to the best of her ability, but still has the opportunity to lay back and still find the small beauties in life. Inside of this cafe that is run by this alcoholic 30-something who is legitimately not past her prime, but it is kind of funny when it is used inside of that kind of context where it's kind of like, look, you are still totally fine. You don't have to drink yourself into a coma to try to make yourself feel more amicable. But then, of course, Miko, who is this soldier who, lost function in his leg, and so now he can't necessarily go on missions, but he has the opportunity to go through and man this cafe where Lycoris, who have just not necessarily fallen off the path, but have been given them the opportunity to go and still participate in smaller missions to try to keep themselves in the act and inside of the fight to try to keep the peace inside Japan. That's the baseline. But it's just the charm, the dynamic between the main two, which is so on the edge. You could call it Yuri bait in the beginning and the middle of the show, especially with how their relationship grows, but essentially the ways that these two characters support each other towards the end of the 13 episodes that we have of this series, to the point where they are legitimately furious at the potential of harm and hate coming to any side of any part of their relationship is just insane. Because at the end of the day, this is an action series, but the best part is that just very much like Equilibrium and Christian Bale and like all the stuff that follows towards the rest of it, the action is stellar and top-notch, the choreography is great, like how they deal with close quarters gun combat. Sure, Chisato is just a walking aimbot and she looks like she has hacks on, but the way that they're able to juggle that with the slice of life aspects and the different missions that they have the opportunity to go on and kind of expand their group and expand on the relationships between the rest of these characters, is honestly something that consistently got me invested into all the dynamics. And even though it's incredibly simple, like an action romp would be, it is able to expand on how the characters inside of the show are able to live with their current situation and try to figure out where essentially their future is going to be taking them. Because I will admit, like, easily my favorite episodes came in the final arc of the series, where you essentially have your signature die-hard moment, but the way the relationship has grown between all of these characters and the lengths that they will go to keep each other safe and to also fight for a better future for each other is just absolutely insane. Especially some of the lines that are spoken in towards the rest of this, especially with all the twists and turns that you still have the opportunity to go through and witness inside of the show. I did not tighten the strings of a dying doll just for it to be useless to me again. Dude, it is so hard. It's so raw, especially just the faces that just how far these characters are willing to go for each other towards the rest of it. It is honestly phenomenal. And so I'm definitely invested, especially whenever it comes to this. If you're looking for like a really good, charming, like modern slice of life action flick towards the rest of this, I would definitely give this a watch, especially for the fact that we are going to be getting, I don't know if we're getting a movie or a second season, but we will be getting more Lycoris Recoil in the future. And at the very least, I'm definitely excited to see how many other opportunities, because that's the thing. With Metallic Rouge, they still had more story that they wanted to tell, but they had way too much to adapt, and by the time that they shortened it down to 13 episodes, they really didn't necessarily have a way out, and so everything just felt way too cluttered and way too rushed towards the rest of it. The best thing about Lycoris Recoil's world is that they still have an antagonist, and they still have more opportunities and more ways to expand on the world, that they had their original 13-episode story laid out and completed, but even after all of that was done, they sowed the seeds for so many other potential ideas that they could tell with this story. And even if they knew that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to tell any more of these stories, just these 13 episodes are more than enough of a satisfying one-shot to keep you invested and definitely satisfy that kind of campy action that all of the show was entirely inspired by. And I had an absolute blast every episode that this went through. So I'm really hoping I'm probably not going to be able to keep up with another episode next week, but probably the week after we're just going to have to wait and see. I'm really coming up on a milestone here, so I'm kind of curious to see what idea I'm going to be having lined up for that, so I'll try and keep that in mind so I can keep it on track and keep it on schedule. But besides that, cheers, have a good one.